Hi, welcome to the Fit and Healthy Today show. And today our topic matter is going to be on radiation. Now, today I'm going to kind of define it and do the best I can from a layperson's standpoint of explaining the different forms of radiation and what it means. And then on our next program, I'm going to discuss the things that you can do to protect yourself against the various radioactive exposures. And it's pretty well dispersed among our population and on our planet Earth, and it comes in all different forms. There's mainly two different types. There's an ionizing radiation and a non-ionized radiation. So when we have an ionizing radiation, there's actually electrons that are removed from the shells. When you talk about individual elements, they have a nucleus, with protons and the neutrons, and then an exterior that has electrons. Hopefully that helps, or you remember something from high school maybe. But in a ionized radiation, they lose these electrons. Now, we're dealing primarily in our arena naturally found, at least from a standpoint of the planet Earth and with nuclear power plants and nuclear weapons, three main ionizing radiations. Now, I'm going to leave out neutron bombs because nothing's left pretty much of anything of life left with neutron bombs, and so survival is not even a possibility. But when we talk about alpha, beta, and gamma radiation, those are the ones that we discuss when we're talking about ionizing radiation. Now, alpha radiation, and I wish I kind of had a diagram here for you to show you on this, but I don't. Alpha radiation can literally be stopped with a piece of paper. It's particle-based, and it cannot travel through thin materials. So if you're wearing thin layers of clothing or that type of thing, alpha radiation cannot pass. It's not as electromagnetically unstable. It's a helium nuclei in which there's two protons and two electrons that disperse, and it releases a alpha particle radiation. You're going to find it most commonly in radon. And radon, you'll hear about homes being tested for radon exposure. Radon is probably the most common ionizing radiation found on planet Earth. And once again, it can be stopped with just a piece of paper. So generally, when we're talking about radon exposure in homes, it would be on homes that would be elevated with wood, right directly, off the ground, where it can come through the windows, come through as a gas in vapors. Now, when you're talking about concrete foundation, much less likely, except for exterior if you're outside in a radon exposure. There are radon test kits that you can order and get if you suspect that you do have alpha radon particle radiation in the home. And you get chronic illness with it. Breathing issues are problematic. Higher cancer rates are evident in homes that have high radon exposure. The next common form of ionizing radiation is beta radiation. Now, beta you're going to find, and it almost has to be in a chemical reaction from a nuclear power plant or some source of a chemical reaction that stimulated certain elements that are found on the periodic table to become something more active by nature. Now, beta particles they pass through paper. Heavy clothing can keep most of them from damaging skin, but generally probably about a 2 or 3 millimeter thick aluminum can stop beta. Now, inhaled though, no. Beta is going to cause much more severe damage than alpha radiation, which inhaled is also damaging. And that's why with radon you'll get lung cancer or those types of organ cancers. Beta would just be kind of times 10. Stronger, more active. It's going to tend to mess with the electromagnetic activities in the body, the RNA, DNA structure, and the aging process of the body as well, too. My husband brought up a point to me. When you talk about radiation, it's pretty much, when you look at the different strengths of it, it just really super ages the body tremendously, depending on what the exposure is. Now, gamma radiation we get in X-rays, and we get from nuclear power plants or nuclear waste it's transported. You know, I know the power plants themselves may be considered pretty safe from attack and earthquake and all of that, although the one in Japan, Fukushima, didn't show to be that way. And it's still leaking through the ocean, and to the extent nobody particularly knows. But it is a gamma radiation, and gamma radiations can only be stopped by lead, and very thick lead, generally between 2 and 3 inches of solid lead. I kind of wonder, you know, when I'm getting my dental x-rays and they put that little thing over my throat, how much actual protection I'm getting, because from what I'm reading, it takes a far thicker amount of lead to protect you than just the thin layer that I'm getting with the jacket on us. But it definitely penetrates all human tissues down to the depths, even into the bones. So when you get an x-ray, it is going to, that's why you can see all the way down to the bones. It does give you a gamma exposure, not as severe, obviously, as sailors being around a nuclear power plant that's spewing out the radiation gamma exposure, but that happened in Fukushima, or people exposed to a nuclear weaponry as such as occurred in Japan in World War II. We get extreme, with radiation sickness, you get extreme nausea, vomiting. It ages the body very quickly and pretty much causes cellular death throughout the body. If you have a radiation exposure, there's things we're going to discuss on the next show about what you can do to protect, or if you know precursor that you're going to go in for like an x-ray or an MRI to protect yourself against the damage. The next radiation, which I think we see commonly on an everyday basis, is going to be the non-ionizing radiation. So there's no particular electron separation or division that comes out of the outer shells of the electron belt. So none of those are going to divide out so much with the non-irradiating. And they vary in different hertzes, and they can be measured by EMF detectors. Now, whereas the alpha, beta, gamma need to have a special type of a GM Geiger counter, preferably ones that can measure over a period of time. And on our next show, we'll bring one and we'll show you, my husband has one, of how they read and what they look like, and explain to you how you can get one if you're curious. But EMF detectors are probably going to be more effective in detecting cell phones, radiation, refrigerators. A friend of mine, John, put his EMF reader in his refrigerator, and it was the highest EMF he had in the house, and it was in yellow range, which meant continual exposure to that refrigerator could cause harm. So there are EMF readers. So when we look at the different frequencies, we've got higher to lower frequencies, and the lower the frequency, the more damaging to the body. So, you know, we have sound waves, radio waves, and regular light waves that are non-ionizing radiation in and of themselves. And we've got UVA, UVB, IRA, IRB, IRC, blacklight lasers. Now, those damage and can damage the skin and eyes over a period of time, and as a result, then you see the skin cancers, because they do change the RNA, DNA on the skin tissues themselves and cause the genetic mutation to where cancer can develop. A higher step up, lower frequency, would be your microwave frequencies, which would be your cell phones, most microwave ovens, cordless phones, airline scanners, other than the CT ones that you walk through. And literally, what they do is they literally heat the cell tissues. So that's why sometimes if you have your cell phone next to your ear, it gets things feeling really, 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 really hot. It's because it's heating your cells in your brain and the tissues surrounding it. Or if you keep it in your pocket, naughty no-no. It literally heats and damages the tissues. And over a period of time, it can be cancer causing. Once again, most of these are cumulative. They happen over a period of time. Now, there are very strong radio frequencies such as radar. We'll talk about HARP that the Navy uses that actually can destroy life under certain circumstances. Television, some cell phones, same effects as microwaves, and difficult to stop the activity it does, but also, once again, it heats and destroys tissues, and obviously having a cell phone or being next to a microwave, and in my opinion, exposing food to microwaves changes the RNA, DNA structure of the foods themselves and of the water that you put in the microwave. So those frequencies are not good when you go to put them into the body. The body doesn't recognize them as being something natural. A little lower frequency would be your power lines. They actually cause neurological and muscle interference electromagnetically, and over a period of time with all that electromagnetic interference, it has been shown if you live by power lines or work by strong power lines, it can cause various forms of cancer. Next, the lowest frequency is going to be your magnetic, and MRIs are based upon magnetics. I really truly am very concerned when it comes to breast mammograms or MRIs, those exposure. I mean, a breast mammogram is 300 x-rays. When we have thermograms nowadays that can read and see tissues for cancer prevention and detection, and yet we're throwing all this radiation on people and actually alternating their RNA, DNA on a cellular level. These non-ionizing radiations, one exposure is not going to usually give you, except when you talk about MRI or heavy magnetic radiation exposure. One occurrence would most likely not trigger, obviously, radiation damage or cellular damage. But it's, once again, the cumulative. So if you're going every year for a mammogram or you're having multiple CT scans or MRIs, I think in the future it could be very, very problematic, and there's been some statistical data that's been showing that out. I put up a chart, and Bill, if you can switch over to that I kind of wanted you to see. When we're talking about sources of radiation, you can see on here natural sources primarily would be radon. So if you suspect or you have a lot of lung issues in your house, allergies, things like that, I would get a radon testing kit and order one online and see whether or not, or have somebody that's an expert in this come out and test your home. But when we look at the exposures, you can see nuclear medicine, consumer products would be cell phones, medical x-rays, and that the earth produces quite a bit from outside. The cosmic forms, volcanoes going off in Italy, they produce. It's kind of funny. I was reading a little bit of information about the higher elevation that you are as well. Like, for example, here in Lompoc, we're just barely above sea level. But when you go to Denver, your radiation exposure is much greater, and your risk of RNA, DNA damage over a period of time on a cellular level thereby increases your risk of mutated cells and then damage and potentially cancer then to the cells. So elevation changes, radon exposures, cell phone usage, my gosh, nuclear, do you live close? Do you work in a nuclear power plant? And I know those are low levels relatively, but cumulative, not knowing what those do. Some of the sites living close to, issues where there's missile silos, all of that. And then just the simple issue of slight emissions, maybe leaking just a little bit out of a power plant, or the transportation of nuclear waste to the deep salt mines. It's got to make you wonder just how much exposure we may have that we don't even know about. So that is, from a layperson's standpoint, the best explanation I think I can give you in this brief a period of time. Next time we will address the things that you can take supplement-wise, food-wise, that can afford you some protection against all these radiation exposures. Next, we're going to be moving on to the fitness portion of our show. Thank you. Okay, fitness. When we're talking about arms, and I have had women that are asking, how can I have pretty arms? So today we're going to address a couple of exercises that you can do with a 5, 10, 15, depending on your strength level, to help tone these beautiful bicep muscles that we have right here. So I'm going to grab a couple of weights. Now these are 20-pounders, and for me these are pretty light. Most people are going to start with a 5 or a 7-pounder if you're female, and guys maybe a 15 or 20. But I want to show you a couple of different motions, and each of them work the bicep slightly different. The first one is just a straight curl, and you bring it up and you twist it back down. Now see, I'm starting with the weights headed that direction, and I bring it up and I have a slight spination, and I alternate it back and forth. Good posture, as a matter of fact, sometimes being up against a wall. You can also do this in a seated position if you have a fragile lower back. In order to put a peak on the bicep and give it a little bit more beautification, this motion is called a hammer curl, and all you do is just bring it straight up and down and straight up and down. And I like to alternate because it gives you a little rest between each repetition. And when you give it a little rest between each repetition, you can do a little bit more. I would like to see you be able to lift weight to where you can do at least 10 to 12 repetitions, 2 to 3 sets per each different exercise. And I think probably after about 6 weeks of doing it at least twice a week, you'll see some results. Thank you very much for this portion, and we're going to be moving on next to the research portion of our show. Thanks. Hi, welcome to the research portion of our show, and with us today is Ralph Turchiano.
And thank you for that intro. Now here's something to think about the next time you go to get your blood pressure checked at the doctor's office. You may not want to freshen your breath up as much as you would like. Hence, there's an article that recently came out in the British papers, didn't make the US papers, but in regard to antiseptic mouthwash. Now, they discovered that antiseptic mouthwash raises blood pressure, but not necessarily in the way that you may think. Now, as I go to read verbatim, this is what they claim. And I use their words because their words are more alarmist than anything I can make up. Because using mouthwash is a disaster for health, increasing the risk of heart attacks and strokes. Scientists are warning. Now, this little tidbit of gloom and doom was actually published in the respected Journal of Free Radical Biology and Medicine. Henceforth, what are they saying? Well, they took volunteers and they took I don't want to say the brand name, but they took a mouthwash which contained the ingredient called chlorhexidine or chlorhexidine. Now, this is a common element in antiseptic mouthwash. Now, even if it's not in your brand of antiseptic mouthwash, it just may be the fact that it's antiseptic that's causing the problems. And you'll learn more in a second. They discovered this. Professor Alduwalia, who led the study last night, condemned the widespread use of antiseptic mouthwash. Why? Because the swilling of antiseptic mouthwash kills off good bacteria that help blood vessels relax, henceforth increasing blood pressure. Now you're saying to yourself, wait a second, I'm not swallowing the mouthwash. Why is it killing off good bacteria like an antibiotic? Well, the bacteria in your mouth may play a greater role in controlling blood pressure than you may actually realize. When they gave 19 healthy volunteers antiseptic mouthwash, and they were expected to use it twice daily, within hours, the blood pressure began to rise by about 2.5 to 3.5 units. That shocked them. Within 1 day, their blood pressure was elevated. This is not to count people that use antiseptic mouthwash on a daily basis. We're just talking 24 hours of use. For each 2-point rise in blood pressure, the risk of dying from heart disease rises by about 7%. According to separate research, such a rise also increased the risk of dying by stroke by 10%. 24 hours of antiseptic mouthwash. The professor also said we are not telling people to stop using antiseptic mouthwash if they have gum or tooth infection, but would ask why anyone would want to do it on a daily basis. They also said, quote, this is how it caused the blood pressure to rise. In this case, again, the antiseptic was chlorhexidine. It kills, now this is the antiseptic ingredient, not the brand. It kills microbes needed to help create nitrite, essential for blood vessels to dilate properly. Within 24 hours, this is what occurred. The mouthwash caused nitrite production in the mouth to fall by over 90%. Now you figure how much can basically the bacteria in the mouth make a difference in the ability for the body to relax blood vessels and the rest of the body, legs, arms, heart, the whole lineup. Blood nitrate levels in the blood fell by 25%, just 24 hours of use. So the next time, or actually any time, but if you're going to go get your blood pressure checked at the hospital or the medical doctor or medical office or any particular type of healthcare practitioner, the next thing you have to ask yourself is, should I be using antiseptic mouthwash a day or a couple of days ahead of time to get an accurate reading? Something to think about. Within hours, it raises blood pressure. Not by swallowing it, just by rinsing with it and spitting it out. After that, another caveat. We have to look at fever-reducing medications that may actually spread the risk or spread influenza. But again, not by the way you think. People think, well, if someone takes, for example, in their case, ibuprofen, acetaminophen, or in what they call acetylsalicylic acid, or I should say aspirin, they think, well, they don't feel as sick, so they're moving around and they're communicating or going to work or whatever it is. No. That does play a role, but it doesn't cause the spread of disease in the way you think. And this was produced in the Proceedings of the Royal Society B today. That was the publication. This is how it works. Fever actually helps lower what's called the amount of virus in a sick person's body and reduce the chances of transmitting the disease to others, something called viral shedding. And basically taking drugs that reduce fever can increase transmission, meaning they increase the amount of virus that sheds. The research is important because it helps us understand how to better curb the spread of influenza. People, and this is reading from their quotes, people are often advised to take fever-reducing drugs, and medical texts state that doing so is harmless. The Royal Society today said otherwise. This view needs to be changed. We need to do more experiments to determine precisely how much reducing fever increases viral shedding in humans, and to estimate how much more people spread disease because not only because they're more active, but they do increase the amount of virus that they shed to other individuals. So basically in conclusion, the fever-reducing medications, ibuprofen, acetaminophen, or aspirin, basically increase the amount of virus that you spread. Fever, on the other hand, which naturally occurs, reduces the amount, I should say, of virus that you spread. So, if you want to make other people sick, besides going out, take these medications, you'll be spreading more of that wonderful thing all around. Now, another one that you may think, and I'll read from the headlines. This was published in the New Scientist, and it actually involved a couple of different publications. And this is a trivia question for you. Actually, I'll word it exactly how they word it. What is the third leading cause of death in the developed world? And remember, you got to be fair, and I'll explain it in a second. Given that cancer and heart disease top the list, you may guess at diabetes or a stroke or something along those lines. Remember, we're talking the third leading cause of death in the developed world. And of course, according to the researchers, you would be wrong on those guesses. In fact, most of you are probably wrong. I would say 90% of you would be wrong in your guess. The answer is something called iatrogenic death. And what that is, iatrogenic death, if I'm pronouncing it properly. This death is caused by medical errors, adverse drug reactions, and hospital-acquired infections. So that's responsible for being the third leading cause of death in the developed world is actually being treated for disease. Ironic. And I go on to say what they say. Take cancer. Anyone with experience in chemotherapy knows how dangerous chemotherapy side effects are. It can weaken the patient's immune system to the point where they succumb to mundane infections. Obviously, they don't die of the cancer, but they die of something else, henceforth cancer cured. That is well understood, but recent discoveries about tumor cells' ability to spread to other tissues suggest another. Chemotherapy might sometimes make cancer more aggressive. That's one of their examples. Another example, which we just proceeded with the article in regards to fever-reducing medications, or consider the humble painkiller. Millions of people take them to make bouts of flu more bearable, but at a population level, they may be turning infected people into more efficient virus spreaders, causing up to a few thousand extra deaths per year in the United States alone. Again, reported to the New Scientist, and again, referring to the article that was just presented a little while ago. This is according to the most widely cited figure. This is interesting, because here's another guess for you. When do you think the last time they kept records of what's called these iatrogenic deaths, or people that die from hospital errors, adverse drug reactions, and so on and so forth? Well, the last time they kept records of this, they were probably so stunned they decided to stop counting. The last time they actually kept records of all these people dying from drug reactions, side effects, or hospital infections was the year 2000, which was estimated at 225,000 people. Now keep in mind, it's only been 14 years since we last accumulated statistics on that. You got to ask yourself, why? Well, again, we won't know if we're fulfilling the most basic tenet of medicine to do no harm until we start counting more carefully. Again, it's kind of unfair because it doesn't list the amount of people who are saved by medicine. But however, data is data. The third leading cause of death, ironically, is medicine. So again, my time is up. I greatly appreciate it, and thank you very much once again.
Thank you very much, Ralph. Once again, do your research, and we'll do our best. And you can find this information on YouTube/VH Film, and oftentimes quite a bit of the backup information that Ralph discusses is on engineeringevil.com as well too. Thank you very much for joining our show. We appreciate it.